when we introduced ourselves to each of these communities, we started with dinner. You know, we hosted a dinner. We didn't have any PowerPoints. We introduced ourselves. We just broke bread together, and we talked about whatever they wanted to talk about. And that was probably one of the most important features of our engagement.
I'm Carolyn Parrs, clean tech communicator, coach, and host of Just Power, a podcast about creating a just transition to a clean energy future that leaves no one behind. If affordable, reliable, clean energy that benefits everyone is important to you, you're in the right place, my friend. We have the power to make that happen, and that's what's happening each week on the Just Power podcast. Hi, I'm Carolyn Parrs, and before we get going today, I just want to say a few words about Just Power. The whole podcast was created to make sure that in our race to emissions-free future, we don't leave countless communities behind that have been underserved and overburdened for decades. If we do that, our energy transition won't work. So many leaders have said it, even on our podcast, it just won't work. And we will have repeated the harms of the past once more. And I know no one really wants that to happen. So by sharing this podcast with your friends, your colleagues, even legislators, policymakers, you know who, you are enlightening them to an issue that they might not even know exists. An issue that will only escalate as the energy costs will rise, and they are, affecting more and more low-income and moderate-income folks, guaranteed. So this podcast is all about calling that out, and we need your help. So I have two big asks for you today. One, if you enjoy this podcast, leave us a review on Apple, on Spotify. We have a YouTube channel as well, wherever you enjoy your podcasts. And two, I would love it if you would share the Just Power podcast with one person today. You know who that might be. One person. That would mean the world to us. And everybody did that, we would double overnight. So I want to thank you so much for considering that. I am so excited to invite our guest on, Jeanette Pablo, who is doing groundbreaking work in environmental justice communities. She is the CEO and founder of Climate Equity Foundation, which began as an initiative of the Clean Air Task Force. And the goal of this initiative was to help solve long-standing environmental issues by informing policies to right the wrongs of the past and achieve the social, environmental, and climate goals that we all want to happen. And their research focused on 6 communities in 3 distinctive regions. And we're going to dive into that today and see what they learned and how we can use these findings to create a more sustainable and equitable world. So, welcome, Jeanette. So great to have you on.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
You are welcome. We have a wonderful show ahead of us here. What an ambitious goal you have of like reversing the historical injustices ultimately, right? And I'd like to ask you to start. How did environmental justice and this project become a focus for you?
Well, most of my career has been with associated with climate advocacy, but I have a background of volunteerism involved in a range of pro bono programs that led me to this incredible work that we've been doing. And I'm not taking the credit. I have an amazing group of people that we work together. And so early in my career, I started off with some pro bono programs. I won't list them now, but they did involve working with the homeless, working with just a wide range of deeply concerning and truly unjust situations faced by people who have absolutely no causation from themselves about it. So this was an opportunity for me to really dig into something, the kinds of things that I care about, and blend my career and my volunteerism into this work on climate advocacy and environmental justice, and how, we learned very quickly they're inextricably connected.
Yes, they are. And I'm really impressed with what you did. Okay. And we're going to have the perspectives of environmental communities, right? Justice communities report in our show notes. So you're going to get to dive into that, but we're going to talk a little bit about it. But you really need to look at it too, because there are also some films there
Yeah.
that are very touching and well done. Well done. Uh, but let's lay the groundwork here. All right. The body of your work focuses on 6 communities.
Yeah.
And they're in 3 different areas: New
Right.
Jersey, Louisiana, and the Navajo Nation, right? So tell us how you selected these communities and the environmental impacts that they were or are affected by.
Well, if I could just step back a tiny bit first, because we actually did work for 2 years before we approached these communities, and we worked with them
Okay.
for about 3 years. You don't just jump into a community and say, "Hi, I'm here," right?
Lesson number 1, don't do that.
Exactly. And actually we had, like, our first phase was really about exploratory research, and our theme was we don't know what we don't know. We are, our team was primarily climate people and advocacy and policy, and not environmental justice. And so we actually spent an enormous amount of time doing research. We did about 50 interviews of people in environmental justice organizations and
Good.
academia. We did at least 30 webinars addressing these kinds of issues. And later on, I'd like to give a shout out to 2 in particular. And we did some tabletop research and, like a lit review, the interviews, we did a survey, a national survey of environmental justice communities, and then I went to COP in the annual COP event, and in Glasgow. That was the first one after COVID, the COVID stall, and I just, when you're working with communities in any way, it's a very personal situation. And so I went to every single panel and discussion or speaking engagement that the people from the United States, from the environmental justice communities, were talking about. And I would go up, I'd talk to what we're planning on doing and how we want to work with them. And I invited them to be on our advisory committee, because without the advisory committee, not just their guidance, but they are environmental justice experts, and we depended very heavily on their sage and very generous advice. So I don't want to make it too long, but that's really how we started.
Right. So did you did a lot of research before, right? Is what I just heard you say, and interviews and webinars. And so through all of that, is that when you selected the 3 regions and the 6? So there's 3 regions with 6 communities in total. Is after all that research, then you said, hey, we're going Newark, New Jersey, and the Navajo Nation. Is that how that happened?
So largely so. What happened was, so we did the national survey of environmental justice communities, and we reported on that before publication to our advisory committee. And the advisory committee said, "This is great." I'm paraphrasing.
Okay.
"This is great, but you guys need to go into the community. You got to,
Aha.
essentially get out of our offices and go into the community." And I said, "Great." And I thought, "Oh, wow. Okay."
Out of the office and into the community.
Exactly. And it's totally the right call. Not necessarily intuitive, because academics, as in some ways I am, you're really not
Mm.
necessarily, your research is more you're not actually talking to a lot of people because that's a different kind of research. So, so, so the thing is, we didn't have a lot of time. Um, and so like how are we going to find communities who are going to talk to us? Like they're busy, right? And so I talked to our advisory committee, and one of the individuals was on she was a leader in the Ironbound community, and we asked.
Ironbound is in New Jersey,
It's in
right?
New
Yeah.
Jersey, and I asked if she would let introduce us to the community, and we would like to work with them. And so that was really the key, because I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of inherited relationships, but by her introducing us, we
Mm.
had, we didn't have a relationship of trust at that point, but we had the benefit of the doubt,
Yes.
and that accelerated our ability to work with these communities and take up all their time and everything like that. And then another advisory, the point of the advisory communities have a very broad um, range of environmental justice communities. And so another person on our advisory committee worked in New Mexico and worked almost exclusively with indigenous communities and
Okay.
tribal communities. And so we talked to her about working in the Navajo Nation. And then,
So you really leaned into your advisory committees,
oh
right?
yes,
I get.
yes,
Yeah. Okay.
they any success that we have is coming from the advisory committee and the rest of our team, who was so dedicated to this work. And then and then kind of interestingly, um we we connected with St. James Parish and St. John the Baptist Parish through one of my colleagues at Clean Air Task Force, who was in the development office, fundraising.
Right. And those parishes are the third region,
They
which
are the
is
third region.
Louisiana, right? Okay.
Exactly. Cancer Alley. And he started, I had an um, open staff meeting that anybody in the at Clean Air Task Force who wanted to participate in or just listen in on, because there was an enormous amount of interest in this connection. And he actually ended up coming over into my office, and he is actually an environmental justice leader himself. Just happened to be so, and
Fantastic.
he was a terrific person to work with, and that's how we started working with uh, the St. James and St. John the Baptist.
Okay.
Yeah.
So three different regions. And can you tell a little bit about each one of them, what their environmental issue was that you were facing? A lot of times there's layers of this, but it sounds like there was some distinctions between all of them. So let's start with, let's say, the Ironbound, Newark, New Jersey.
Well, I just want to say the reason we chose basically an urban, a rural, and a tribal
Okay.
community is that, and none of those are emblematic of that category. So I want to state that.
Okay.
But we're trying to
Yeah.
think, how do we create policies to work with environmental justice communities and address the often historic challenges from the past, and a range of existing um, super challenges. And actually, what we did find is there was a lot of commonality amongst the challenges, but the solutions varied.
Yeah.
See,
Yeah. No, I remember that, hearing that in it.
yeah,
So, um, again, let me just bring us back to like what they are, right? So we can get a context for that, and then find out what some of the findings that you learned, right? That kind of was similar,
yeah,
right? Similar, but had different emphases, right? Is what I got the understanding. So
exactly.
let's talk about, yeah, what are those three um, environmental issues that you
Okay.
saw?
So we'll start with the Ironbound community. They are a vibrant culturally vibrant community. They are in Newark, New Jersey, and the population is primarily Spanish or Portuguese speaking as a first language. The Ironbound has the longest Superfund site of any community in the U.S. and probably the largest Superfund site. A Superfund site is a nickname for the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act. It was created in 1980, and the purpose of it is to clean up highly toxic, contaminated sites that could be anywhere. There's not like a designated location for those sites, and in the case of Ironbound, it's in the river. And so
Got it.
EPA is tasked with working with these sites to repair them, but it's extremely low. It's a very slow process, and Ironbound has been living with their Superfund site for decades. To give you an idea
Okay.
of that, so they also have several power plants, and they also have the largest incinerator for New Jersey's trash, and it's a really small neighborhood.
That
So,
sounds like it's a congested neighborhood where all other maybe surrounding neighborhoods or cities use for
exactly.
dumping.
No, exactly. And it's so bad. They wanted, there's a story that Ironbound wanted like a public swimming pool area. And so they start, this is not to be laughing out of, obviously, but they started digging the hole for the pool, and the ground lit up in fire.
Oof.
This is a highly contaminated um, uh,
Yeah.
area. And so they deal with those. Now, they're very fortunate in having the Ironbound community corporation. It is a thriving, I can't say enough about the great work of this organization. The food bank work, the early learning program, preschool program for parents and younger children. They have all kinds of jobs.
So that's what the Ironbound community has are issues that they're struggling with. Let's talk about the parishes and Louisiana,
Okay.
which you said earlier, Cancer Alley, right? Well, a lot of people
Yes.
might understand that.
Yes, and in fact, we never used the term Cancer Alley until we were doing our films, and the environmental justice leaders talked about the term Cancer Alley. It's not how you want to, characterize your neighborhood, but
Right.
to a certain extent, they've really embraced it because it's a fact, and it's a fact
Mm.
that has to be changed. And so now we are, using those terms. I mean, again, back to language and respect is a huge driving force in working in this space. So,
So how did it get that name, Cancer Alley? Like, what does that mean?
so there's a very concentrated industrial complex, and the toxic air emissions, as well as what's in the ground, has led to unbelievable amounts of cancer incidents. In fact, one of the environmental justice leaders, Sharon Levine of Rice St. James, she started it because she realized, she was going to a funeral every month, and then a funeral every week, and then 2 funerals in a week, and she's like, something's wrong here. And she and Concerned Citizens of St. John and the Descendants Projects, the 3 organizations that we work with, have done, again, incredible work against the against the odds. And here's this. This is what it kind of goes down to. One of these environmental justice leaders paid for their blood work testing. You can do toxic chemicals and testing. She ended up having more than 50 chemicals in her body that do not belong in the human body.
Yeah.
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 And so that's where the cancer comes from.
Yeah. And the tribal communities, what are they experiencing there?
So it's important to recognize that you could really say that Ironbound and St. James and St. John the Baptist parishes are environmental justice communities, but it's a slightly different dimension because in the case of the Navajo Nation, it's a sovereign nation. So we speak less about it as, they experiencing serious environmental injustice, but we tend to talk about it as the nation. And I have learned this as I go, right? Instead of, a community, although they are communities too. So just wanted to kind of footnote that. So they have, well, first of all, they have the uranium contamination from uranium mining a number of years ago. And there were not safeguards. And I can't remember the statistic exactly, but it's somewhere between, let's say, right around 70-80% contamination from the uranium in the Navajo Nation. It's in, it's in the dirt and it's in the water. It's really a really horrific situation. They're also right now coping with it's up in the Four Corners area in New Mexico. And the Navajo Nation spans 4 states, but one of the biggest parts is in New Mexico, and that's where we were. And also there are 2 big power plants, coal plants. There, the San Juan Generating Station was shut down, and Four Corners, which I believe is scheduled to shut down. And the jobs from the plants were really great jobs. And
many, I know that many Navajo members work there, right?
Yes.
So,
at least 40%
yeah.
of the San Juan Generating Station employees were Navajo, and they were good jobs, and they had benefits. And that's gone now, and really the people are looking for jobs outside of the nation, and this is really an existential threat for the nation. We did one of the kind of hallmarks of our work is we started in the communities. One of the first things we did was we did focus groups, and that's where you really hear what's going on. And like this one family, one of the speakers at one of the focus groups talked about his brother who lost his job when the plant closed. He was actually a miner, so it was a combination. It was and so his job, the only job he could get was in Alaska. Family was divorced. They are not living on the mother and the 2 children are no longer living in the nation because they had to go find someplace else. And it's a very devastating situation that is replicated one way or another over and over again.
Yeah. That's the flip side to closing coal mines, right? And closing all of these polluting facilities is that many people rely on those for jobs. Hence the just transition, as what we call the word, just transition from fossil fuels to clean energy, high-paying clean energy jobs. So, but it's a process, and it's not easy. So we have these 3 communities, right? And a big part of the let me just back up here. What was fascinating in the findings was that the communities, all of them, wanted the same things. Right, we mentioned that a little earlier. I want to get to that because they wanted the same things, but maybe in different order or different emphases, right? So tell us about what are those different things, 4 or 5 different things I think they are, that the community needed and called out.
So, so we did a lot of work with BW Research, and they've been a great partner. And they did the survey of what do communities want in a community benefits program,
Right.
and we were, like you said, we were just really astonished at the commonality of what they wanted. So in response to what is the most important benefit in a community benefits plan, there were, let's see, how am I going to phrase this? So the I'll read you the ones that were all in the same chart, right? But it was, like you said, different priorities for different of these community groups. So a lot of times people are talking about community benefits being jobs, but here's my shtick. Like, a job is a result. It's not a benefit. If you don't have secure housing, if you don't have access to food, if you don't have access to transportation for training, if you have children and you have no way for childcare, etc., you don't have a job, or you can't keep the job. So that's, I think, one of the most important things to think about. So what did emerge with these three categories? Requiring construction of affordable housing, increasing climate resilience, improving water quality, funding for community organizations or programs like senior citizen centers, for example, funding for assisting homeless individuals. I mean, you get a picture just, with just a few of these, of what the challenges are of these communities. Let's see, funding for mental health and substance abuse services. Let's see, climate resilience again, funding for cleaning the local environment and reducing pollution. And let's see, I think improving stormwater and drainage and flooding. And that's the group.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, you started with affordable housing, right? That was a big one. Water, another big one. I made some notes. Climate resilience.
Yes.
Big one, because when climate happens, mishaps happen, or just where climate change affects, it depends on your income level to be able to respond to that, right?
Exactly.
So,
They're the most vulnerable to flooding, hurricanes,
yeah.
and it's slowest to recover.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, we saw that in Katrina, where, that white people got their flooding and more resilience faster than other communities did, right? And there's actually lots of documentation on that.
Yes.
So, community organizations, I'm looking at my notes, homelessness.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
These were themes that you saw over and over again. Okay.
And you say, like, you might be interested that, so Ironbound and we call them the Northern chapters in the Navajo Nation, they both had affordable housing as their top list.
Interesting.
Right.
That is a crisis everywhere, I must say.
Yeah. So climate resilience was for the river parishes. They get a lot of flooding. And for Ironbound, it was number 2. So water quality, interestingly, water quality was number 3 for everybody. See, so when you put this together, you can start thinking about, okay, how can we develop policies and programs to address, in a meaningful way, these challenges? And again, I think it's kind of the solutions are where the variance is, because if you're rural, or in a sovereign nation, or in an urban area, you would have different tools probably.
Yeah, so learning what the issues are and then creating policies to address it, right?
Exactly.
Is that part of what you do? I know that it's findings to inform the policies, but do you go into the space of actually helping with that with legislators and policymakers in that capacity?
So that is the ultimate goal, um, a piece of the ultimate goal, but you know, it's very slow work because you just have to be so knowledgeable and so meticulous, and really you have to, like, every phase we do, we have to go back to the community and say, here's what we're thinking, this is what we concluded, please, let's talk about it. And because they know their community, they know their strengths, they know their capabilities. These people have been working very hard and
Mm.
making enormous improvements long before, me or anybody else came along. So you really so the reason we only did these 3 groups, I wanted to do 7 or 8 at the time. Very quickly I became aware of the fact I'm married to uh, this is a marital relationship. There's no,
Mm.
like, oh,
This is
see,
not like running the surface of things. You're
oh,
going deep.
absolutely. And, I expect to be, working one way or another with them the rest of
Mm.
my career. And then I'm going to go down and volunteer. But it's
Got it.
not going to work unless it's absolutely integral to what the community understands and knows and wants. So
Yeah.
So, for example, right now we are in sort of um, an interesting situation where community benefits plans are not necessarily um, at the top of the list, shall we say, for a lot of these programs. And, the thing is, for community benefits plans are also important for clean energy and climate folks, because if you're not working with the community, you probably aren't going to get cited. And frankly, you shouldn't get cited. So there's a kind of a yin and a yang between advancing energy,
Mhm.
clean energy, all the energy we need, and working with the communities.
They belong together, right?
Exactly.
Well, but yeah. And
And
yet the community, you're saying the benefits plans right now are not emphasized or really dropped down in a
yeah,
list of priorities, which could have a ripple effect
it
on.
could. It could, but I'm actually quite optimistic because there is a very practical reason for working with communities. If you want to cite energy and clean energy, and most of the advanced energy is clean energy, and I'm actually thinking that what I will do when in about 6 months, I'm thinking of doing a blueprint for community benefits plan. How does a company work with a community in an effective way, as opposed to what happens often? They bring their corporate, and I work for companies a lot, in my career, but they come to the community and they bring sort of their, like, unconscious corporate mentality, and that is really the opposite.
Mm.
When we introduced ourselves to each of these communities, we started with dinner. You know, we hosted a dinner. We didn't have any PowerPoints. We introduced ourselves. We mixed up
Totally different approach, right?
very different. We just broke bread together, and we talked
Yeah.
about whatever they wanted to talk about, and that was probably one of the most important features of our engagement.
Mm. Yeah,
Um,
my next question was about the approaches you took that were very different. We talked about uh, interviews and focus groups, but then there was also, right, like you said, we sat down for dinner, right,
yeah,
and got to know them as human beings, um, and which created a different relationship than if you came in with a suit and tie and a PowerPoint,
yes,
as you said. Um, Also, what I read was street engagement,
yeah.
right? Street engagement and local observations. Tell me a little bit about that.
So so uh so a focus group, you actually you don't have a random group range of people, because we invited the community leaders to provide the different focus groups, and they all did it in a different way. So, for example, in Ironbound, they had, as I mentioned, the early learning parents. So this is mostly mothers, not only mothers, who had children, pre kindergarten. Another one, we ended up with of basically middle-aged workers, and so it varied a lot, but it's still sort of a piece of the pie. Street engagement is the balance to that. You basically stand out on the street, and we had an easel, so we had T-shirts, so we look respectable, and we just talked to anybody, and we would find it was difficult in the rural environment, but definitely in Ironbound, we'd stay on a street corner where people were like passing back from the metro to home, and we just talked to them about anything. What do you think about this? And so that was a nice, really
People
nice.
would stop and talk to you. You
Oh
did
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So
You must have looked friendly, right?
no, we gave them $10. We
Oh,
So
okay.
this is a really important thing.
Yeah, let's call that out, right?
Okay,
You're
yes,
getting information, really good information, and it's a reciprocal, right?
that's right. And I would just point out to two resources that were pivotal to our thinking. So Eddie Batista is the executive director of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, and he was a speaker on a webinar on environmental justice research and community partnerships, and he basically called it out. He's like, researchers, academics, they come in to my community. They want us to spend all this time. We're supposed to answer all these questions about their lives. And then they don't bring water. They don't have a snack. That's a respect thing. It's not like you're hungry all the time, but, and they walk away. And he's like, and these researchers have $1 million to do the work. And
Yeah,
they've spent all
yeah.
our time. And so to me, that was just like, wow. And so I happened to have a environmental justice consultant. Fantastic. She's absolutely fantastic. So I looked up what her hourly rate was. And so for our focus groups, now our focus groups were an hour and a half, and hers was an hourly rate. It was $250. So we gave everybody who attended a focus group $250, a gift card, because the value, she had enormous value and experience. There's nothing wrong with that. But what these people were sharing with us and the information, you can't get that anywhere.
Right.
And you need that information to be impactful.
Right. And from a business case, I mean, you can save millions of dollars by actually talking to the community and avoiding bad steps, historical inequity, things that you don't have any idea about, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah. And so the $10 was, a pro rata because they talked to us for like 5 minutes or so. I didn't really do the math right now, but we're like, well, you're spending time with us. You're sharing your information. It's invaluable to us. So that was something we were and we wrote personal thank you notes to every, not the street engagement people, but for the excuse me, for the focus groups. And
right.
And then we donated it sort of depended on how big it was, but we made a donation to the environmental justice communities who were organizing it, because they were working too. Like, you have to really think about these people as peers.
Yeah.
Or we'd be lucky to be peers,
Yeah. So what lessons or actions from your community-led approach can help other organizations, right, or companies that are working in these communities? Any must-do, like you must do this, ideas or lessons that you'd like to call out?
Well, you have to be very respectful. and you just have to listen. You know, the classic
Listening, right.
listen. You have to
Big.
listen. You have to explain to them. I mean, before we went into the communities, we had a video call with the leaders, and we'd explain what we were doing, what we intended to do, et cetera. What kind of work could they be helpful to us with, and it's very slow if you're thinking in a corporate environment. It's the
Hmm.
right pace in the community. Um, I was listening to a webinar, and somebody's like, "All right, you've this you've got a deadline for us to respond, and you know what? I can't go meet all my community members and talk to them about this and work on a consensus. By the time I've done all that, that deadline is long past. So
Right.
deadlines, or understanding the timing is really important.
Right. And I will just say point out that it's also a good practice to start early, right?
Yeah.
Like start early working with your communities, getting to know the people there instead of coming in and think it's a one and done situation,
No,
right? Will never work, but really beginning to nurture them way before you need something from them, right?
exactly.
So,
And I will say one uh, absolute essential is, and I didn't even mention it, we did an assessment of the communities before we went in. We have a whole process, like a checklist, and all this information is in the back of all the reports. Like I wanted people to read this and say, "Oh, I can do that. This is how I can do that." But yes, you have to do an assessment. You have to look up not just demographics. You have to look up on the internet, like what are the local organizations, what are their experiences, what are they focused on, and one very valuable thing is
yeah.
we look back at least between 10 and 15 years in the news,
Mhm.
so you know what's happened in the last.
Yeah, and what they're living with, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Um, you just can't go in blind because you can make so many mistakes, even inadvertently.
Yeah. And you mentioned having an advocate, right?
That's
Someone
an
there,
ambassador.
ambassador. Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
and
That's
that
worth its weight in gold for
right.
sure.
Yeah, it really makes a big difference, and the ambassador can say, "We don't use those words. We call it this way." Like they can guide you out of the unwitting pitfalls that you know you're going to make mistakes.
Right. Maybe just come in just saying that right out the gate.
Yeah,
I'm going to make mistakes. Please
right,
forgive me in advance.
right. And
um,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna just we were talking about lessons. I'm curious as to like what's next in this work, right? Where do you go from here now, Jeanette?
Well, I've given a lot of thought. Like I briefly mentioned, I'm going to be working probably in the summer on a community benefits plan blueprint and justification. There are companies that I've spoken with. They're like, I'm going to do a community benefits plan because it's going to be helpful to my project,
Nice.
the success of my project. But it's still very hard. Uh, you know, it's very hard to sort of off the bat, like, what is a community benefits plan? Like I've written several of them, and I'm confident now that I can tailor, like a very practical, like manual almost for how to work with communities. And I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, very helpful.
I'm
It's like a
also,
playbook, right?
yeah, it's the playbook. Exactly. And then I've also talked to an organization that, they have historically done, uh, community without the name, the community benefits, because they're, the electric, sector often, not always, has it's operating in the community. And we're actually working on a survey of past types of activities of community benefits, like going back 20 years. And like, yes, this is a business, forward, approach to your success and the success of the communities. it's not always going to work, but because there's a lot of
Yeah.
challenges and missed steps. But I think that the actual examples will be helpful. And I'm looking forward to working in these communities. Uh, um, I Well, I'll just say I've offered to do a pro bono program with them. If one comes up, if there's a range of things I could be doing, and I'm looking forward to it.
Okay. Wow. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Uh, as we begin to wrap up, I just saw that you have a new focus area, right, which is small island developing states
Yes.
and the existential threat of climate change with them. So, want to touch on that a bit? What's going
Sure.
on there?
So um, you have to allow a certain amount of randomness in life because you don't really know what kind of lane
Did
you're in.
this just happen for you? Like it, like,
It's it,
you went from rural, now you're on an island somewhere.
Well, I went to Sharm el Sheikh, the COP, a couple years ago, and I was in a taxi cab, and somebody flagged down the taxi cab, not realizing I was in there. Everybody has a badge, so you know it's fine. So he came in, and we started talking. I said, "What do you do?" He said, "Well, I'm working in small island developing states, and I'm looking at the idea of digital sovereignty because a lot of these small island states will be flooded in the next X number of years,
Yes.
pretty soon." And I want to see if we can preserve our sovereignty and our culture. And I'm like, well, that is the most interesting thing I've ever heard, and I've never heard of it. So a year goes by, and I ponder it, in the back of my mind, and then I go to Dubai the next, not last year, but the previous year's one. So I'm flying back from the COP at Dubai, and I never talked to anybody until the last hour before landing because we know what happens. You talk the whole time. And so the person next to me seemed quite nice and, everything. And so I said, "So were you at the COP, et cetera?" And he says, "Yes." And I said, "What are you working on?" He says, "Well, I'm working on small island developing states." I said, "Really?"
Wow. What are
And
the chances of that?
he's working at Woods Hole. He is an oceanographer, but he's actually from Tuvalu, and he's showed me pictures of his neighbors and the water coming up to their doorsteps. And I said to him, in 6 months, I'm going to do a project with you because I can't walk away from this. And so with Columbia University is great work. I do a lot of work with them, and they produced this paper that you noticed, and we're actually about to do the webinar on March 14th. And so it's something I really care about because I have been a climate advocate since 1995. I'll just put it on the table. I have never heard of small island developing states. How can that be? Right? There's something so wrong. The entities and communities who are facing the first impacts of climate change, I had no idea of.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe I heard the name, but how can I not
Mm.
know that?
Well, now you do, and you're going to actually have an impact there in many different areas. You're doing amazing work, Jeanette, right? And I love the idea that you're going to be creating this playbook, right,
Yeah.
for organizations like, here you go. Here's what to do and not to do. It's fun. And when that happens, we'll have you on again for sure to learn more about that. So how can people learn more about you and the work you do?
Well, first, I've been very excited to be able to talk about what I really care about so much on this podcast. So I will take your advice that you said at the beginning, in terms of passing it on. But I am the CEO of the Climate Equity Foundation. Clean Air Task Force very generously enabled me to roll over into the 501c3, and I have all my films there to date, and all of our papers, as well as the or I think we have 9 papers from the Clean Air Task Force. And just stay tuned. We're getting busy.
Yeah. Wow. That's good to hear. that you are getting busy
Oh, yeah.
and that it's actually growing instead of shrinking, right? During this time. So, and we need you more than ever, right? So, thank you so much for the work you do and for coming on Just Power. And thank you for showing up and listening to this podcast. Remember, I said at the beginning of the show, like, send it to someone that you know would really benefit. This would be a good one. So, why don't you just do that? Not if you're driving, but if you're not driving, pull over and go ahead and forward it to one person. And let us, you can go onto our Facebook page and make a comment there. And want to thank you so much for joining this podcast today and for staying connected to the environmental work we're doing, because remember, we are all in this together. Thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you subscribe to Just Power wherever you get your podcasts. And if you really loved it, leave us a review and tell everyone you know about our podcast. It's going to take all of us to create a clean energy future that leaves no one behind.
The Just Power podcast is brought to you by New Mexico State University and Mind Over Markets, helping clean energy, clean tech, and regenerative businesses craft clear and compelling messaging that scales. Want to continue this conversation with Carolyn? Follow her on LinkedIn and follow the Just Power podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and on our YouTube channel. And for more intriguing conversations, follow New Mexico State University's micro-learning social pages on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube.